There we go, we are live.
Thanks, Rory. And it is recording, isn't it, Rory, I think?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay. Welcome everybody that's joined us. We'll just wait for another couple of minutes or so before we kick off, just for the people to join in. I think we'll start. Welcome everybody. I'm Simon Kirkland, Sport Structures, and we've got a number of guests which we will push through today. Firstly, welcome to the first workforce webinar that we're running of a series of 6. The other 5 will be in the 2022, the Birmingham Commonwealth Games year. And Roy, if you just want to just nudge on the slide. And just want to give an overview of outcomes for today, and then this will be the first of a series, and certainly the next one we'll look at coaching, and the third one will look at sports development, and then 4, 5, 6 in the series will build on the first 3, and also we need your views on how we'll build that. So what we're doing today is setting a context of pretty much why, what, and then one how, and we'll bring on the celebrity guests as we go. So to kick off, to put it all in context, and we've enjoyed working with Sport England and CIMSPA on this. To put this in context, Head of Professional Workforce at Sport England is Lucy Moore. So over to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you for having me today. As Simon's said, my role really is to frame this webinar and the upcoming series, just to give a bit of context around people planning and where we're going as Sport England with people planning. It won't be a new topic to most of the people attending the call today, but the idea is that we are trying very hard at the moment to elevate the priority around people planning and workforce planning within funded partner organisations, within community clubs, and across the sector as a whole. So, Rory, could I have my next slide, please? I'll just give everyone a moment just to read that. So this is some draft copy from a support pack which we'll be producing, which aligns to the Code for Sports Governance, which has recently been revised. So you'll see nothing in here that is particularly rocket science, but the idea that people planning as a proactive and core business process is something that we are really trying to be more explicit about. So whilst implicitly we all realise that sport and physical activity is a people business, whether it's frontline, whether it's working in an office, whether it's managing a facility, I think perhaps we haven't been as overt about that. It's almost so obvious that we overlook it, and we haven't been as deliberate in our approaches to planning for people as we might have been. So we're really looking to try and find ways that we can support funded partner organisations and the sector as a whole to better understand the needs of their people, to plan for their people, and ultimately try and give those that work in the sector, whether paid or unpaid, a different and better, meaningful experience. Next slide, please, Rory. So why people plan? Well, successful organisations across business are more and more speaking about how it is important to understand and develop the diversity of the people they have, the skills, behaviours, the culture of their workplace. And part of the challenge that we have in sport and physical activity is that we have such a portfolio of ways that people work in the sector. So paid, unpaid, part-time, self-employed. We are not a homogenous workforce, and that is a challenge when it comes to our workforce strategic planning, which for me makes it even more important that we actually do it, because the interdependencies between people who do things for free and people who get paid is so much all over the place, that we really need to put some time in to understand our own workforce. And so part of the presentation today, I'm just going to introduce a few models and concepts which may be of interest to people on the call, and happy to discuss as we break away a bit later on. So for me, and there's a quote there from Richard Branson, which I think is a bit hackneyed now, it gets thrown around quite a lot. But actually, if you take care of your employees, or in our case, maybe volunteers, maybe paid workforce, maybe contractors, they will take care of the clients. And certainly from a Sport England perspective, historically, we've probably looked past the workforce and straight to the participants. And actually what I'm trying to do, and we've been doing in the recent months, is to try and elevate that and to say, come on, let's look after those people who actually make sport and physical activity happen. So no matter where you are consuming your sport and physical activity or how, there are people involved in that process along the way. Some of those might be frontline deliverers, others might be administrative people. Even if you're consuming something at home, that's been designed by an instructor, by somebody running a business. So let's just be overt about that. Let's talk about them and let's think about what they need. For me, great people plans are aligned to both business outcomes and attuned to people's needs. So typically, people development is often treated as siloed, whether that's in an HR function or a workforce function. And actually, your whole strategy should be related to your people. This is the key thing to achieving your business objectives. So when we're writing our people plans, we want to move this from just being an activity that's a one-off for a workforce leader or an HR person, and actually being much closer to the strategic working of your organisation. Importantly, the second part of that sentence is that there needs to be the balance that it's also attuned to people's needs. So this isn't just about what the organisation and the business need to do, but it's also about what do the people need to develop. Next slide, please, Rory. This slide is just some considerations for workforce planning. So who are your workforce? Who do you consider to be your people? This is where sport and physical activity is particularly complex because of the relationship between paid, unpaid, part-time, casual. We know that actually fully employed staff are not the majority of the workforce. We rely heavily on volunteers in sport and physical activity, and we also know that part-time and self-employed workers are a key underpinning foundation of what happens. So do we understand them? Who are they? What do they need? What are our underpinning beliefs and systems as an organisation when it comes to things like recruitment, retention, support, training and development, progress, transitioning, and leading people? So are we coming at people development from a deficiency perspective, looking at what people can't do, or are we taking a strengths-based approach? Do we believe that it's our remit to support and develop our volunteers, or do we think that lies with somebody else? How and who is responsible for the development of these people? What are our philosophies? So really starting to interrogate what are the unsaid and implicit messages that our policies and procedures are actually sending to our workforce. And then we start to think about what capabilities do we need as an organisation now and in the future. So the model on the right hand side there, it's from a guy called Adam Gibson. He's got a book called Agile Workforce Planning. He's done many blogs and YouTube videos, and I would recommend people taking a look at that. But what I really liked about his model here about the 7 rights of workforce planning was that it's got right capability in the centre. So what do we actually need to be able to do? What are the capabilities that we require to achieve our strategic direction as an organisation? And then we can work around to start to think about what does that mean in terms of taking on the right risk, the right shape, the right size of organisation, the location, both in terms of physical location of people, but also in terms of organisational location. So do we want lots of senior leaders at the top of the tree and not very many people on the front line? So thinking about how we organise our staff, do they have the right amount of time, right amount of cost? So you could work around this model, starting with capability at the heart of it, and then you have to balance the other priorities. So we know that we haven't got infinite amounts of money. So what do we need to get done? What are the cost considerations? But rather than starting with the money consideration at the centre, let's think about what do we actually need to be able to do as an organisation. Next slide, please, Rory. So I just wanted to touch upon why I think capabilities and capability in that model is so much more powerful than just talking about what jobs do we need doing. Because actually capabilities are a range of different things. So when we talk about what capabilities do our organisations need and our people in our organisations need, that's a blend of skills, knowledge, accreditation, mindset, demography, and this is where I've adapted Adam Gibson's model because he put physiology, which doesn't really strike for me, it doesn't work for me. So I've moved that on to demography and environment. So you'll notice there's nothing in there about experience, and that is because from a hiring perspective, in my opinion, experience is something that we use as a proxy measure, I suppose, for things like mindset, skills and knowledge. So when we're in a hiring process, we ask people to talk about their experience as a bit of a way of trying to understand whether they have the right approach, the right skills and the right knowledge. When you're talking about experience from a developmental perspective, actually, what experiences are we giving people to develop their skills, knowledge, and perhaps to work towards an accreditation of some kind? So experience for me doesn't feature there because it's almost a bit of an umbrella term, and you need to think about whether you mean experience in terms of a hiring process or experience in terms of developing somebody. Demography, I think, is a priority for everybody at the moment. I think if we critically appraise our workforce as a whole, we're typically white male, younger than other sectors. So it would be different for every single organisation on this call. But understanding where is your strategy going, who do you want to reach, and how does your workforce actually represent or not represent that? We don't have particularly good statistical data about LGBTQ representation in the workforce. We don't have particularly strong data about the number of disabled professionals that we have. We have a sense that these are underrepresented groups, but it's very hard for us to pinpoint. We know that we lack ethnic diversity in the workforce. So this is where, when we're planning and doing strategic workforce planning, thinking about how and who do we need for the future. And the final thing there is environment. So it's okay developing people and giving them opportunities to learn things, but if the environment that they come into when they get back to work doesn't allow them to show those skills or demonstrate that knowledge, it's sort of a bit of a waste of time. And often when we think about developing our workforce, we forget that bit. So we take a very individual approach to what we put in place, how we plan, what our strategies are, and we forget to look at our organisational culture and the environment that they have to do their job in. So when we think about planning for strategic workforce sake and looking at the capabilities our business needs, make sure to consider these. Next slide, please. So the final thing I just wanted to share with you is about trying to make people planning a proactive and ongoing process. So you need to consider the strategic needs of your organisation. We would encourage organisations to undertake some kind of environmental scanning. So the picture on the right hand side there, the PESTLE analysis, what's on the horizon for you? What do you know? It may well be you do a SWOT analysis when you feel more comfortable doing that. People planning needs to be based on what you know. So what do you know about your people? What data do you have? Do you understand why they leave? What's the churn rate in your organisation? Have you done an exercise to identify business critical roles now and for the future? And have you actually spoken to your workforce and found out what they need, what they feel, and gained their input in that? The final point there I just want to share with you is that when we're thinking about changing our capability as an organisation, we've got different options. So we can build, we can grow it ourselves, we can train people up, we can buy, we can go out and hire new people with different skills, different knowledge. We can borrow, so we can think about who else might have this and how can we use some of their time, or we can bounce. So who do we already have in our organisation that actually the role they're in now might not necessarily be the right thing for them, or they've got something to offer somewhere else in the business. So it doesn't always have to be that if we want to change what our business does, that we need to get a whole new set of people. but we need to give it some deliberate thought and look at our different options for making changes when we identify a need. Final slide, please, Rory. So this comes from the same document I cited at the beginning, and I really want to stress that every organisation is going to be different. I really resisted and I don't know, pushed back on the idea that there would be some template people plan that people would just fill in on behalf of their organisation. This has to be whatever it is for you, and maybe that's an interactive document PDF, maybe it's just a way of working, maybe it's a sketch, maybe it's just the way that you manage your meetings, or perhaps we will see people writing strategic plans which are people first and task second. I don't know what one of those would look like, but could you plan your entire strategy around your capabilities and the humans and then put the doing bit afterwards? I don't know. So I guess that's what I'm leaving you with from a Sport England perspective. This is a massive priority for us over the next 5 to 10 years to really help organisations do this. We need to do it for ourselves as well. And I just encourage any feedback, any comments, and allowing people to innovate around this area of work as much as you possibly can. So thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Rory, if you step back 2 slides and a quick question for you, Lucy. If anybody would like to pop a question in, then please pop it in the chat box and Rory will ask Lucy. Just on this, and really like the model, any thoughts, and you sort of alluded to it a little bit, about imbalance or missing out one of these boxes? Any thoughts on that? I
suppose for me, the big one that we usually miss is around the environment. So we normally treat people development as if it's in the person and the person alone. So if Lucy's not performing very well at work, you send her on some kind of training, or you give her a mentor, or you encourage her to watch some YouTube and listen to some podcasts, and that is to change me. But if I then go back into an environment, so outside of sport, you know, Metropolitan Police, we've all heard what's kind of going on there. They work really hard, try to recruit a different demography of person, but if the environment they're going into doesn't allow them to be themselves, or is uncomfortable, so they leave, or they feel they have to change themselves to fit in, that actually all the benefits in terms of getting a different capability by getting a different demography of person actually is completely undermined because we haven't done enough work on that environment. So that for me is quite a big one that we often overlook. I think as well we often lean towards accreditation, and sometimes perhaps shy away from some of the softer things, which might fall in the skills and the mindset side of the model. But that's not just in sport, that's across, you know, that's across all industries, that I think there's a dominant narrative that you get knowledge and skills by doing some kind of accreditation, and actually some of the work that CIMSPA are trying to do with professional recognition is actually the other way around. So can we have the skills and the knowledge and then get the accreditation afterwards, so you don't have to go on a course to get the things, but you demonstrate you've got the things however you've got them, and the accreditation follows after that. So yeah, I don't know if that's answered your question.
It has, yeah, and I think just going back on the first thing you said about, because there is a drive for change, particularly in demography, the demographics of particular organisations, and then comes the question of quoting or positive action, stroke positive discrimination. Well, there is a danger in that, in as you say, changing the people, which doesn't necessarily change the culture. Is that what you're sort of touching on? Really?
Well, I suppose if you want to take underrepresented groups as a specific example,
yes,
I think we all have to have an honest look at why our workforce demographics are the way that they are, and not necessarily put that problem on the person who is from the underrepresented background. So what is it in sport and physical activity which means it doesn't seem like a credible profession to people from a broad range of communities? What is it about the way that we hire, fire, qualify, train people that actually puts up artificial barriers and stops talented disabled people becoming part of the workforce? So where are the structural inequalities that we need to address? And as opposed to necessarily always putting it onto the other person. Like we need to change, and we need to see the underrepresentation of certain groups as like a sign that there are problems. That isn't the problem. It's telling us something. We have to listen to that. That's showing us that is the symptom. It's like if you're unwell, just treating the symptom and not the cause. You know, what we're seeing is an output of a system that needs more thought.
So actually the cultural change is more important than the head count, in a sense, if we're looking at equality.
It's both. Yeah. It's figuring out why is it happening, how is it, and how can we take positive action to address that. You know, if we're working against years of systemic and embedded racist practices, then that is going to need some positive action. So it's balancing it. It's tough. It's not easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Rory, thanks, Lucy. Any questions come in, Rory, on?
No questions yet. We've had someone asking if the slides will be shared, which they will be.
Yeah, and the recording as well. Brilliant. Thanks, Lucy. And please stick around. I'm sure there'll be some debate a little bit later on. Now, our second presenters are from CIMSPA, Chartered Institute, of course. Natasha and Sarah, and what we wanted to do was to explore, you know, as Lucy led us in there into that accreditation based on vocational achievement, and also then that relationship between apprenticeship standards and professional standards. So, Tash, over to you.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks, Lucy. That's a really nice kind of segue into the work that we're going to kind of present here. So, Rory, if we could just click through the slides, I think there might just be some animation bits on there. Into the next slide, please. So, as Simon said, we're going to look at kind of the how, really. So Lucy really kind of touched on the why it's important that we, you know, have a focus of our people on development and, you know, the reasoning behind it. And what we're going to be doing from a CIMSPA point of view is trying to look at how we can support that. So just for those that don't know who kind of CIMSPA are, which I think a lot of people do on here, as a professional body, we kind of work across the whole sector with a focus on workforce. And what we've been doing over the past couple of years is really to engage with all our partners and develop the professional standards to support that. I think just click through to the next slide if that's okay. With the main vision being around that we are that kind of sector that people want to be part of. And as Lucy said, we need to look at the sector as ourselves and how can we be a more welcoming sector that we kind of encourage people to be part of. So as a vision for CIMSPA, that's what we're trying to do. We want to be that sector that people want to come and be part of and stay at as well. If we just jump to the next slide, please, Rory. And what we want to be able to do is really look at professionalising the sector. We do that through our professional credibility and our membership that we have. So if we click through, it will show you through some kind of membership opportunities that we've got here. So by achieving professional recognition through the professional standards, which we'll touch on in a second, you can get access to CIMSPA membership. And as Lucy said, we want this to be kind of broad and open so people can access membership and professional status through a variety of you know, methods of achieving the professional standard. So that could be through CPT, it could be through degree programs, qualifications, apprenticeships. So many multiple ways that people can really express their knowledge, skills and behaviours against the professional standards and be, you know, approved for kind of what they've done over the period of time that they've been in the sector. So moving on to the next slide where we'll talk about kind of professional standards. So you've probably heard these words banging around for a while now, and we've been working with the sectors, employers, training providers, awarding organisations, education partners as a whole to develop these. And these are the underpinning framework that we look at mapping people's knowledge and skills, behaviours into. So we've got 40 in total that are all sector-led, widely consulted on as well, so we get people's thoughts and feedback onto it as well, and it will cover all their knowledge, skills and behaviours of what somebody would need to undertake that specific role. And as Lucy touched on earlier, it's really important that we're developing people in multiple ways. And obviously with professional standards, the purpose of them was that they would be flexible and people could utilise them in many different ways. So if we just click through to the rest of the bullet points there, if that's okay. And on to the next slide for me, please, Rory. So as we've said, we've got the professional standards. We're working with our awarding organisations, higher education partners, training providers, further education, many kind of all of our education partners to develop training that's endorsed against the professional standards. But what we want to be able to look at as well is what are the wider uses? How can people that are working utilise the professional standards and kind of use them as a stepping stone into that next career, whether they're currently employed or they're looking to join the sector as well. So how can the standards be used? Just on to the next slide, please, Rory. So we've got our core occupation standards, and then these are mixed into environments, populations and specialisms as well. So this means that you can undertake a piece of training that is mapped to either multiple standards or one on its own, and it can be broken down into different ways as well, because as we know that people learn differently. Some people want to pick up things in bite-sized chunks, but some people may want to do a much longer piece of training, and obviously this allows that flexibility for partners to be able to pick up that and create training based on individual needs as well. Next slide, please, Rory. So what we've tried to do here is create a single standard framework, and this shows, if we click through, Rory, that there are multiple uses within here. So as we mentioned, we could pick standard up and use it as on its own to develop training, or we can pull multiple ones together to create education products, which is what we've done for apprenticeships, as we'll touch on a little bit later, and which just shows the flexibility within the working of the professional standards as well. Next slide, please, Rory. So the main uses that we're looking at here for the professional standards is that they are flexible. We want to be able to, our partners to be able to pick them up, create products from them, and obviously, which is the end goal of developing people in the workforce as they work through the sector. One of the areas that Sarah's going to pick up in a second is how we've used the professional standards to develop apprenticeship standards for the sector. And obviously, like I said, these have been used to create that education product with a number of standards as well. So I will pass over to Sarah now.
Thanks, Tash. So as Tash said, they are another way to develop the workforce. That's how we see them. So at the moment, we currently have 6 sport and physical activity apprenticeship standards. These have been developed by employer-led trailblazer groups who are facilitated and supported by us. So these standards replace what you might know as the old framework. And as Natasha's already said, the professional standards are embedded within those. So they'll include specific knowledge, skills and behaviour that we need for a specific occupation. So now what they do is they put employers in the driving seat. They give apprenticeships a clear career path to follow. So a series of higher and degree apprenticeship opportunities have also been released. They don't necessarily sit in our sector, but you can draw funding down for your employees. So I know Sport Structures are going to touch on these examples with some business and management further down as well. Okay, Rory, if you could, next slide, please. So one of the main things we get asked is what is the difference? So as Tash has already mentioned, the professional standards are used to develop all those educational products. So it might be CPD, regulated qualifications, degree programmes, and they make sure that they're fit for the sector. So when you take an employee or they go away and do some training, you have the confidence that if your employee has completed a CIMSPA endorsed qualification, the workforce is then deployed with best practice. So a main role that they can be used by employers is to develop job descriptions, maybe for new vacancies, and also competency frameworks. So they're the minimum expectation for each occupation. So you could use those knowledge and the skills within the learning development requirements and make it really nice and clear what your expectations are of your employees. So they are used and created from the professional standards that are in the sector, but the apprenticeship standards are used to assess competency in the workplace. That's the real key thing about the apprenticeship standards versus the professional standard as it sits on its own. So if you complete a professional standard, so it doesn't matter if it's regulated, degree or apprenticeship, that will provide individuals access to membership and then allows them to develop their professional status for the sector. So employers and deployers can increase that professional recognition and engagement with the sector. Tash has already mentioned, but the main purpose is to ensure that the occupations in the sector are underpinned by that one standards framework. Try and avoid that confusion. Okay, Rory, next slide, please. So some of the wider work that we're looking at is a focus on management standards that are available. So it's another opportunity again to develop your people, and we'll be looking at something called a management academy. Maybe this is something we might touch on further down in the series. So employees can access training that is mapped to these occupational, the professional standards, sorry, and that will provide a career map for employees. So, for example, you might find a sports coach might have some of the skills and might already be doing some of the actions of an aspiring or an entry manager and might wish to become a general manager or senior manager down the line. So poor management is one of the top 3 reasons people leave the job in our sector. So that's quite a large percentage there. So Rory, can I ask you to go to the next slide, please? So I just want to pose this question. Sorry, Rory. So what % of people do you think have a management responsibility in our sector? So that management responsibility is quite broad. OK, so Rory, if you could click on for us. So 60% of our workforce do have management responsibilities. In what capacity you see that as, it might vary. Next point for us, please, Rory. It might come as a surprise to you, it may not. Only 20% of the sector, managers in the sector hold management qualifications. Whether that's essential or not is another question, but it might be that managers would like training, it's an area that is weak in our sector, so something that is worth investing in. And then the last point there, please, Rory. So 2/3 of managers are looking for new opportunities. So just some information for you, that's from the CIMSPA labour market information. And I think further on in the series, we will be looking further into some of those topic areas that we mentioned and that Simon's previously mentioned as well. If it is of further interest looking into the management specifically, then that's something that we can certainly cater for. OK, thank you, Rory. Thanks.
I must learn that this mute button works now and again. Yes. Thanks very much, Tash, Sarah. Couple of questions for me. I mean, I've got a finance manager who's got chartered status, chartered accountant status. I've got an HR officer who's working to chartered status in HR. Is it then the ambition from a CIMSPA point of view or from sector point of view that people work to chartered status in their particular line, whether it's management leadership, or I know there's going to be a tutor assessor standard as well, and obviously a coach standard. Is that the sort of ambition that we'll be able to move around the sector because we've got chartered status in a particular line?
Yeah, definitely. I think it provides something for people to strive towards. I think it's an opportunity that we've kind of been looking at, and is there for people in the sector that we've never really had before. So what we're really starting to do is look at how people can progress through. Not everybody wants to kind of get to that point, and you know, but it provides that opportunity. So we want to really value and reward those people that have been working in the sector for such a long period of time, or maybe not a long period of time, but have really had an impact. And that's kind of what we're really focusing on, to really look at the people that we've got and to make sure that they're valued in the role that they've got there. So yeah, so we've got a couple of kind of pathways that are out there. We will be looking at launching a couple new ones in early 22 around coach and the different kind of environments that they would be working in as well. So yeah, there will be new pathways opening up, obviously as we kind of progress through, and we've got the professional standards and we've got products that kind of endorsed against it. So yeah, I feel that with the chartered opportunities that keep kind of opening up, it provides individuals that clear career pathway of how do you get to excellent.
Yes, so in theory, I mean, one of our aspirations within the company is maybe to get everybody to a chartered status. And then people can move around the sector knowing that they've met a particular standard. Is that would seem to make sense to be a good outcome?
Yeah, definitely. That's the dream, Simon.
You had to dream, Tash. Yeah, I think the other bit around that is the value of charter status, and I think the challenge for CIMSPA is sort of you're still a very young organisation as well. So one of the things I wanted to sort of link on, so thanks Tash, thanks Sarah. Any questions from anybody in the body of the webinar wish to ask? Please pop it in the chat box. Anything come through, Rory?
No, nothing yet.
No, okay. What we wanted to do, I think if you can knock this full slide on, Rory, was also throughout the series just myth bust, which is not good even without any rum and coke, on apprenticeships. And I think still there is a perception that apprenticeships are 16-year-old snotty, very, very vocational based, bricklayers, whatever. And actually we've got to try and think, well, actually this is all levels. It could be level 7 management for your CEO, or it could be as said, you know, it could be through other charter status in a way. The other, and I'm sure you can read those, the other big advantage at the moment is that government are giving £3,000 incentive for new apprenticeships, taking in new employees. And also just also remember that apprenticeships can be current employees that could be working for umpteen years and being upskilling. However, the one challenge is if, for example, you've got a management degree, and then it is unlikely that you will be able to get a management apprenticeship. One of the things is that we've got a lot of sports science students who graduate into the business, and it's very interesting that enables people to use the coach or the sport development, the sport health and fitness apprenticeship standard to upskill. So there's some interesting opportunities there, but we want to just have a theme all the way through the webinars of myth busting. So are there any questions of clarity or challenge on the truths and myths of apprenticeships? Anything come in, Rory?
Nope, no new questions come in yet.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. We've done a bit of the why, and Tash and Sarah on the potential, opportunity. We wanted to look at some actual whats and hows. And apprenticeship funding is a very complex one. Talk about levy and things like that. But a partnership we've worked with very closely, Oxfordshire, Active Oxfordshire, and Paul Brivio. So I just want to run a video just describing Paul will describe the partnership, and Rory's going to also, if you have got slow internet and you want to look at it in your own time, he's going to put the link in the chat box. So if we could just play the video, and then we'll bring Paul in and Natalie, who's done the work on our side from Sport Structures. So hopefully we'll be able to share that lovely video. There we go.
Feels good.
We don't seem to be getting any sound, I think.
I make more sense that way.
Paul, welcome.
Don't be so hard on yourself, Paul.
Paul, do you want, while Rory has a little play with the video, tell us what you said in the video.
Well, I think a bit of background really is that I'm definitely was full of the myths that you just spoke about when we entered this sort of enterprise. Completely didn't get apprenticeship or how it could be delivered or made relevant to us. So I think it's really important that people get their heads around what actually appears to be a very complex system, but actually is quite simple when you cut through it. So I think that's really important. I'm also, as I get towards the end of my egg timer career, I look back and think I was a real Philistine about training for myself and training for colleagues around me. So I think for me, it's been a bit of an eye-opener about A, how easy it is, and B, how relevant it can be. So I'm a big fan, and you know, we've been through 1 or 2 learning experiences, haven't we, together, which is really important. But the sort of new way we can deliver training through digital, the sort of one-to-one service, the way it can be made very bespoke to our operation, is very, very important to me and to us, I think, going forward.
So you said about digital one-to-one. There's a perception that the apprentice, whether they're leadership or management or whatever, tootles off to college every Wednesday morning and whatever, and then comes back to you Wednesday afternoon. Was that a perception of yours? Yeah, totally. And you know, when we tried it, that was perhaps, there was a bit of the modus operandi in that approach as well, in that we might have had to send a young member of staff up to Birmingham to get some of the teaching and training and development. But now it's digital. It's one-to-one for the most part. Our commitment is to give the time to our colleagues to make best use of that teaching experience, and to relate it to our work as much as possible without compromising the integrity of the programme. So for me, it's a very cost efficient way of working, both in terms of cost, financial cost, but just as importantly in terms of time, I think. So that's, for me, is a win-win. So I'll just touch on the levy bit that you levered, but without that, you'd have been paying something £200, £300, £400 for the learner to go through the apprenticeship. So tell us how you've worked the Brivio magic on the local network. Well, like all these things, it's a bit of serendipity, really. It was very handy having Natalie close by for quite a chunk of time to keep reminding me that this was a great opportunity. I think several of our colleagues in the sector, the voluntary community sector, had got experience of working both the apprenticeship scheme and manipulating, if that's the right expression, money into the system from levy payers. So we were very fortunate, I think, in having a really open dialogue with the University of Oxford. They can't spend their levy. Professors don't want to be apprentices, apparently, but they've got a real commitment to Oxford as a place, and they're funding all of the training. So that extra £400 or £500 we might have had to find, we don't have to find, which is very helpful. I personally think
now that I would definitely have committed that money if we'd had to, but actually the link with the university and the whole the whole apprentice movement is again potentially very valuable to us as a network. So very good. I'm sure there are universities all over the country who and other big organisations who would share their resource with people in our sector. So it's definitely an avenue to be explored, and I'm sure Sport Structures can play a role in helping that.
Yeah, hopefully, yes. A levy, in effect, is if the organisation has over £3 million worth of salary cost, then a percentage either goes back into Richie Sunak's pocket or can be utilised for apprenticeship training. And in some cases, that might be as low as, I don't know, £10,000 to £30,000. But if you think that Manchester United have got a levy pot of around £3 million that they're not spending, and they can allocate up to 25% of that out into the community. So University of Oxford, Oxford University, sorry, that they have a significant levy pot that they can distribute out to the community. So there is that opportunity, but also it's there's a lack of knowledge, I think, for finance officers within significant companies around that. Natalie, I mean, you work with Paul closely. What were the challenges that you faced to convince Paul to go and do his partnership working?
My lack of listening skills, probably.
What was that again, Paul? No.
Yeah, I think it was, as Paul alluded to, it was kind of the perception, the myth busting. I think once we got past the kind of challenges of, but hang on, I can't understand how this is eligible for my current staff that are full time. That's when it started to sink in, and that's often what I find. People have made up their mind before they even listen because of a perception around apprentices being 17 or just out of school leavers. And for me, that was the really interesting bit. The second bit is just time and mapping that learning program to the individual learner. We spent a lot of time trying to get that right, just because we know that people are busier than ever now, like having that digital work program. And we're looking at this stakeholder leadership bit, aren't we now, Paul? So it's not just about internal leadership and management, it's about how do we broker this opportunity to other partners, because Active Oxfordshire is such a key, you know, almost in terms of collaboration opportunity and you know, leadership opportunity for the wider partnerships. We can actually leverage this even further now through the work that we've done. So that's something we're trying to spend a bit of time on now, aren't we, Paul?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really exciting opportunity, actually, you know, because nobody's got the time these days to think things through. So they do need somebody with a bit of time, a bit of knowledge to again, my favourite phrase today is cut through. So, but I think that the opportunity of us working both in the voluntary community sector and perhaps with the sports agency, sports clubs that operate in Oxfordshire, could be really interesting, particularly if we're getting into areas like community activation, tooling up people for careers in physical activity and sport, and just giving people generic skills that are so important these days. So really interesting opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate. I worked for Birmingham City Council for a while, and I got some fantastic training from Aston Business School, and that, you know, the impact of that enabled me to move into gave me the sort of knowledge that then I applied into. But when I went to take over at basketball, I always say, well, our training budget disappeared because Portugal decided to play us in the Azores, not in Lisbon, and we lost our staff training budget. So that's the thing. So the question is, what is it too early to say what the impact is? Because I know what the impact, and Tash and Sarah put some stats over about impact or lack of impact through lack of training, etc. Have you got any sort of feelings around impact at the moment? Anything that you can measure? Any stuff that are bristling with confidence?
I've got a gut feeling that people are on the move and are developing. We've got 2 new entrants to our world who are at level 3, and I just feel they're growing all the time. I hope they would grow anyway, but I think this is hopefully accelerating their development. And we've got 2 level 5 emerging leaders, senior leaders of the future, I think. And again, I get the same feedback from them. We're going to have a review meeting very shortly, and we'll have a staff survey probably in April next year, when we'll ask some quite specific questions of those colleagues, I think, to get a sense of their own personal development, but what we think as a business this is helping us to achieve. So yeah, I think it is pretty early days, but we do need to think about it and measure it in an appropriate way. But the most important thing is I listen to them, and I think one of the things I'm feeling good about is their level of feedback has improved and increased. I think that comes with knowing your business a bit more, knowing how to work with people, developing, internal relationships. So I think that's a very good illustration of the progress that we're making, which I think is being helped by them being on a really good quality apprenticeship scheme.
So looping it back then to the why, which is sort of the impact bit as well, does then your people plan, is the apprenticeship program your people plan, or is your people plan funded through apprenticeships?
As those of us who know, those of you who know us, we're very much work in progress. So I think our people plan is emerging. I think the apprenticeship scheme now is at the heart of it. We've got a commitment that all of our staff are either going through coaching or mentoring or development schemes of these types. So there's a genuine commitment there. I think the apprenticeship levy, getting that one-off contribution that you referred to earlier, has helped us augment our budgets. And I think this experience this year will allow us to be more thoughtful going forward about how we develop our people. Because as we become more systemic in our role and more enabling in our role, we are absolutely as good or as bad as our people. So unless we tool them up, the business will fail. So we're going to have to take that more seriously than perhaps we've done before, when we were sort of transforming ourselves and looking at our navel, but now we need to look outwards, and our team need to be very competent at doing that.
Okay, I'm going to come to Lucy, Sarah and Tash and see if they've got any questions. But Rory, any questions from the participants, from the coming in on the chat box at all?
Nothing in the Q&A yet, but
okay.
Drum up
Lucy, any questions for Paul around strategy into practice?
Yeah, I suppose I'd be interested in finding a bit more about how Paul decided on which apprenticeships were the priority at this stage and where you might see it go next.
Mm-hmm. So we've got 4 members of staff, as I say, on the apprenticeship schemes, 2 at level 3, 2 at level 5. Both, they're all doing leadership and management, because we think that is so important, and I think that will just build them up, round them off, and give them a great CPD as well as helping the business. So for us, I think that's working. I think we'll just check that out over the course of the next period of time. I think that was a good decision, because it's a good fit with this change of role that a lot of active partnerships are going down, which is to be less delivery orientated focus and much more into relationship building, place building, system change, etc., behavior change. So I think that will equip them to go to the next level. So long-winded answer is it was a judgment call, and we just need to make sure that it was the right call for the business going forward and for the individuals involved.
Perfect, thank you.
Any more, Lucy? No? Tash, Sarah, anything from your side?
No specific questions. I think it's, just a great example of, the process. Like you said, you've gone through it, you've looked at what your people needs and used the apprenticeships to kind of develop that. And I think that's probably where a lot of organisations are at the minute, especially with the ones that we've been speaking to, is really looking at the options and really digging down into the needs of the individuals that they've got working with them, and looking at the best ways to support them. So I think, it's a really great example that I think a lot of people will probably be in a very similar situation in as well.
Thanks, Tash. Sarah, anything from you?
No, all good. It's just really interesting to hear how it's worked for you. Really, really great.
Thank you. And Nat, you did the cajoling, negotiating, and anything more you'd say in building on the myths that people have maybe got to look to work through?
No, I think it's interesting because Paul asked me last week, or how many other active partnerships are working with you in this way? And I said 0, in the sense of it's still very reactive. So we've got a lot of active partnerships coming to us when one individual staff member needs training or has a gap in skills or behaviours, but it's actually not being joined up. And I think that's why we wanted to just really get some great feedback around this case study, because actually we're trying to position this as a proactive opportunity for the organisation to evolve, sustainably, and looking at how this features year on year. It's an ongoing opportunity for people within the organisation to go through from 3 to 5 and then keep developing. So for me, this is why this was important, because we're working across the network, but it's very much kind of 1 or 2 people at a time. And that's what I'm trying to shift here.
Thanks, Nat. Any questions coming in, Rory, at all?
No questions yet.
Brilliant. Well, can I thank Lucy, Sarah, Tash, Paul, Nat, and others, and particularly Rory for the engine room. The video, I think, has gone in the chat box, and we will obviously be circulating that and making that available. Thank you, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year, and happy Christmas, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you.
Thank you.